Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. And with training camp, ramping up a little bit more, we have some joint practices getting going this week. We already saw today how the Giants and the Lions got into it a little bit in some fights that broke out on the first day of joint practices. So the intensity is ramping up, but with that, the unfortunate side of it is that we do have injuries, and not only injuries in general because that happens, but to some of the major players around the NFL, and it is cutting it close a little bit with some of these injuries on whether or not they are going to be available to play in Week 1 in some of these games. So I'm going to update you guys on some of them, some of the major ones that we saw over the weekend. Starting off with DeAndre Hopkins, he went down with a knee injury, being called a strained knee, and he's expected to be out about 4 to 6 weeks. Unfortunately, that happened last week. He missed practice on Friday and Saturday, and like I said, 4 to 6 weeks is now threatening the possibility of him being out there for their Week 1 game on September the 8th. So Friday and Saturday, that was the 2nd and 3rd of August, about a month from now. It would be pretty close in terms of 4 weeks. If we're talking about 6 weeks, then yeah, probably he will miss it. I think it will be right up until the last second, most likely, probably leading up into Sunday morning of that Week 1 matchup. But you don't want to make it worse by rushing him back. We're only really talking about the first week of the regular season, so of course no one's going to be close to 100% or anything like that in terms of final end product, playoff product. So I wouldn't rush DeAndre Hopkins back. I know you want to have him out there. You want to see what this whole offense looks like. But with a strained knee and how touchy it could be at times, how it could become worse, potentially lingering if you rush it back or anything like that, that's the last thing you want to happen. And the Titans are in a situation where Hopkins isn't really just their only receiver anymore. They did a good job of spending a lot of money to go out and get Calvin Ridley, and he was the Jaguars' best receiver last year. So at worst, you have the same situation that you did last year with Hopkins, but now you have it with Ridley, at least for Week 1. And also, they went out and signed Tyler Boyd as well. So those two guys, just having those guys in there, yeah, it's not the full array of the arsenal that you want to have, but it's still a major improvement from what you had last year. And still, the biggest deciding factor is not whether or not you have all those receivers out there, is whether or not you have Will Levis playing at the level, progressing in his second year as to where you'd hope he'd be. That still remains the biggest factor in all of this. And if he is playing great, and if he's playing at the level that fits this offense, then I don't think there's too much to worry about in terms of Hopkins missing a week, maybe even 2, at worst case scenario. So yeah, it stinks. Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing to happen to Hopkins, your leading receiver. But I think the Titans have done a good job of addressing it. And if he misses it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So that's where Hopkins stands. Unfortunate, he's dealing with a strained knee. But we'll move on to the next couple guys here playing for the same team. The Cincinnati Bengals, their two main edge rushers, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. Both of them are dealing with not major injuries, but just ones that are lingering, kind of just working themselves out as we go on. And by that I mean, Trey is dealing with a chest bruise, so, the timetable on that, I'm sure it varies just on how he's progressing through it and how it just naturally works itself out. And also Sam Hubbard is dealing with what is described as a bulky knee. And on that topic, Zach Taylor, the head coach of the Bengals, said that they're taking it week by week. They themselves don't really know how to put a timetable on it. Like I said, it's just weird injuries, the nature of both of them. So they're taking it just day by day, week by week. But what's uneasy about it is that Trey Hendrickson, the situation that happened with him this offseason, him wanting a new deal, you know that as a fact. He wants a restructured deal at least. And because of that, and because of the stagnant activity of the Cincinnati Bengals, he did request a trade, but he did say that he wanted to stay with Cincinnati ideally. But again, he did request a trade, so it is just a little uneasy having him miss training camp practices, and also on top of that, knowing that he wants a new contract and not practicing. It all gets a little bit weird, almost like a hold-in, but he will be back out there when he's healthy. So it is just a little bit of something to monitor there if things do take a turn for the worse. But Sam Hubbard is another one dealing with just a bulky knee, taking it day by day. And to me, the nature of these injuries isn't the worst thing. What is worrying is that the depth at this position after, these two guys go down, the depth after them, with Joseph Asai and Miles Murphy. I think they had a pass rusher actually today or yesterday go down with an ACL tear, so he's not going to be there the entire season. So you're already down one guy, and now you potentially are dealing with two of your starters being hurt with weird injuries. It's something less than ideal that you'd want to happen out there. You want to get these guys as much exposure to the practices as you can. So that is what the Bengals are dealing with. Not so much their guys, but the depth at this position. If one or both of these guys go down, what's it going to look like? Do you have the necessary pieces behind them to still keep it close to that level of production that you have with Hendrickson and Hubbard? But moving on to the next major injury, probably the biggest one, is Justin Herbert suffering from a foot injury, specifically a plantar fascia injury around the heel area, I'm going to guess. I kind of looked into it, but I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to give you guys bad information, but it's basically just a foot injury. According to the Los Angeles Chargers website, Herbert will be in a boot for the next 2 weeks before he gradually returns to playing in practice in training camp. And the initial feeling right now is that he should be ready for week 1. Again, it is another situation where it's sort of cutting it close. It is unfortunate because with all the newness around the Chargers, new head coach, new OC, new receivers, pretty much new everything on that side of the ball, you ideally would have liked to seen Justin Herbert out there at least in preseason for a drive or something like that to test it out. But I think it's highly unlikely now that he does that, obviously. And to make matters worse, Adam Schefter from ESPN said that because it is a soft tissue injury, it could linger potentially, and Schefter said that he could have discomfort potentially all season if it's not dealt with the appropriate way. So that's obviously something you don't want to hear. I'm sure the Chargers are going to be overly confident, or overly cautious, I should say, with Justin Herbert and this soft tissue injury. Arguably the worst ones to have for Herbert, and all the hype around the Chargers. This is the last thing you want to see, and I'm sure they're going to be cautious with it. Hopefully, he will be out there week 1, but at worst case scenario, if it could linger, I wouldn't risk it too much for him to be out there. But that's probably the biggest one. And then just to round it off here with a couple more, the Los Angeles Rams, their entire offensive line is struggling with injuries and staying healthy. Their biggest acquisition this year, Jonah Jackson from the Detroit Lions, who they signed as a free agent, is dealing with a bruised scapula, and he is expected to miss about 6 weeks, pretty much. So he is highly doubtful for that week 1 matchup. So not how you'd want to start your new chapter with a new team. That's something to watch, something to keep track of, because that is a pretty serious injury, sort of what Debo was dealing with last year in the playoffs and later on in the season. You saw how that sort of re-aggravated itself, so that's something the Rams don't want to deal with in their scenario. Also on that offensive line, the right tackle, Robert Havenstein, also was stepped on during Thursday's practice, and he is also dealing with a foot injury, something of that degree. It's unknown how much time he is supposed to miss, but that's another offensive lineman that at a critical position that goes down for the Rams. And on the other side, their left tackle, Alaric Jackson, is also dealing with a shoulder injury, but the Rams are optimistic that he will be back soon. But that's also something you don't want to see. Arguably 3 of the biggest positions on your offensive line going down. And also with their longtime guard, Steve Avila, now transitioning over to center from offensive guard. You already have that going down, and now you're dealing with injuries. A lot of mismatching on that offensive line is less than ideal for this Los Angeles Rams team that at full capacity, this offensive line could be very, very good. But now it's just a matter of having them all out there healthy at the same time. So it is a few steps back. You know, it is a divot in the road there to kind of go over, but it just elongates the process a little bit more. We're going to have to wait to see all those guys out there at the same time. And then the last one I'll mention here today, the Tampa Bay pass rusher Yaya Diaby broke out last season. He led the team with 7.5 sacks, and now moving forward, this offseason and in training camp, the Bucs felt confident to move on from Shaq Barrett because they now had Diaby. The projection of him, the trajectory of how he was improving, made them feel comfortable that they could move on from Shaq Barrett. But he did suffer a high ankle sprain last Thursday, and that is a scary thing because it was described as potentially being worse than it originally was, but it could linger, and the severity of a high ankle sprain also varies. So it is one of those that could become worse and could just continue to be a problem if it's not addressed properly. But Yaya Diaby plans to be out there week 1, but right now you will need others to step up in case he's not there. So they're going to look to guys like Joe Tryon Shayinka, who really still needs to convince this Buccaneers team to step up in a contract year now for him. You also have Randy Gregory, who did sign with the Bucs, but he is still yet to show up at practice. So the depth at this position is not great. You're probably going to rely more on Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea to kind of carry that weight. But it is weird just with Yaya Diaby, not what you want to see out of your best pass rusher, especially with how great he was improving. But hopefully they just take their time with it. You don't want to rush him back. That's the biggest thing with any of these, and how touchy a lot of these injuries are. They are just injuries that require time. Teams are just going to have to wait it out and see what's best for the player at the end of the day. But that's pretty much all of them I wanted to get to on today's show. Some pretty big names going down, and hopefully we don't see too many more of that going forward now in training camp, and also with these joint practices and preseason starting up. We want to have everybody as healthy as possible. But that'll wrap it up for today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. Please remember, as always, to follow the show and the network on all forms of social media. And also, remember to like, follow, and subscribe. If you want to see more of this show, check out this show on both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel as well, to see more content around the NFL, not just full live shows, but also YouTube shorts and individual segment videos. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with me, Manny Maradiegue, to talk some more about the NFL and all the latest stories coming out of this league. That's it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in yet again. I hope to see you guys back here again with me tomorrow. Let's
go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great. I don't wanna go to